When Montana's cold reached -42 degrees Fahrenheit, winter was no longer just weather. It became a test of survival. At that temperature, metal breaks, fuel thickens, and even breathing hurts. Skin can freeze in less than a minute. Animals die standing up. Machines stop working. And shelters show their true strength, or their weakness. In January of 1948, the Flathead Valley faced that kind of cold. The people living there believed they were ready. Their families had survived winters for generations. They lived in log cabins built the same way their fathers and grandfathers had built them. Thick logs. Stone fireplaces. Wooden floors raised above the ground. Steep roofs to carry heavy snow. These cabins looked strong. They felt solid. And everyone trusted them, everyone except one man. His name was Raymond Caldwell. Raymond had just returned to Montana after serving in the military during World War II. He wasn't a soldier who carried a rifle. He was a construction engineer. His job had been to build shelters in places where mistakes meant death. He worked in the Aleutian Islands, where the wind never rested and the cold could shut down entire camps. There, Raymond learned something important. Cold does not care about tradition. Cold does not care about pride. Cold only cares about physics. When Raymond came home, he wanted to live quietly. He bought land far from town, near the Whitefish Range. For miles from the nearest neighbor. No electricity. No help nearby. Just land, trees, and winter. He did not have much money. His military pension was enough to build something small, but not enough to waste fuel every winter. Raymond had seen families burn through huge piles of firewood just to stay uncomfortable. He had seen men spend their lives cutting wood instead of living. He did not want that life. So instead of building a log cabin, Raymond built something no one expected. A Quonset hut. It arrived on a flatbed truck in the summer of 1947. Curved metal ribs. Corrugated steel sheets. The kind of building the military used for storage or temporary housing. The neighbors stopped and stared. They assumed it was a shed. Or a workshop. Or maybe a barn. Then they heard Raymond planned to live in it through winter. That's when the laughter started. People called it a tin can. A grain silo. A steel coffin. Experienced builders shook their heads. Old trappers felt sorry for him. They said metal would steal heat. They said it would freeze solid. They said he would learn the hard way. One man said, metal and Montana winter don't mix. Raymond didn't argue much. He kept working. He dug the foundation deep into hard clay. He poured a thick concrete floor and filled it with smooth river stones. He buried earth up the sides of the structure to block wind and stabilize temperature. Over the metal shell, he added thick insulation. Then another outer layer of wood to protect it. He placed small windows on the south side to catch winter sunlight. He built a small entry space so cold air wouldn't rush inside when the door opened. Inside, the space felt simple but smart. No corners where cold air could hide. No tall ceiling where heat could escape, just a smooth curve that guided warm air in a circle. In the center, Raymond built a rocket stove, not a big fireplace. Not a roaring fire. A small stove made from brick and clay. People laughed at that too. They said it was a toy. They said it burned twigs. They said it could never heat a real home. But Raymond knew how it worked. The rocket stove burned wood very hot and very clean. Instead of sending heat up a chimney, it pushed heat through a long stone bench. The stones absorbed heat and released it slowly, hour after hour. Even after the fire went out, Raymond finished the cabin before winter. By fall, the valley stopped talking about it. People had their own worries. Wood to split. Roofs to fix. Supplies to gather. Winter was coming, and winter demanded attention. January arrived quietly. Then, on January 19th, the cold came down from Canada like a hammer. Temperatures fell fast. By nightfall, it was -20-8. By morning, -42. The wind did not stop. In log cabins across the valley, fireplaces burned without rest. Men woke every hour to feed fires. Children slept wearing coats. Frost formed on the inside of windows. Floors felt like ice, wood piles shrank fast, even the best cabins struggled to stay warm. That's when someone decided to check on Raymond. They expected to find trouble. Instead, Raymond opened the door wearing only a wool shirt. Warm air rolled out. Inside the Quonset cabin, it was comfortable. Not barely warm. Not survivable, comfortable. The thermometer read 64 degrees outside. -42. The fire had been out for hours. People didn't believe it. They brought their own thermometers. They checked again. And again the numbers stayed the same. Raymond was using far less wood than anyone else. And his cabin was warmer. No cold corners. No drafts. No frozen floors. The curved shape moved warm air gently around the space. The stones stored heat like a battery. The stove burned clean and efficient. The valley had never seen anything like it. Slowly, the laughter stopped. Builders came quietly to study the design. They asked questions. They measured. They took notes. Not because it looked good, but because it worked. That winter changed everything. People realized something painful. They hadn't been losing heat because winter was unbeatable. They had been losing heat because their cabins were wasting it. Raymond didn't destroy tradition. He respected it enough to improve it. Over the next years, others copied parts of his design. Some added rocket stoves. Some added thermal mass. Some built curved roofs. Some built full Quonset cabins. Not everyone liked the look, but no one questioned the results. Raymond lived in that cabin for many years. It stayed warm. It stayed efficient. It proved itself every winter. When Montana's cold reached -42 degrees, winter didn't reward pride or tradition. It rewarded understanding, and one cabin changed everything. Winter slowly began to loosen its grip on the Flathead Valley, but the memory of that cold did not fade. People could forget snowstorms and frozen roads, but they did not forget fear. And they did not forget numbers. They remembered how much wood they burned, they remembered how cold their homes felt, and they remembered how warm Raymond's cabin stayed. When February ended and temperatures rose above zero, people finally had time to think. They gathered again at the general store, at church, at community halls. But the conversations were different now. No one laughed anymore. Instead, people asked quiet questions. How did it stay warm? How little wood did he really use? Could this work for my family? The most difficult change was not technical. It was emotional. For years, people believed suffering was part of winter. That waking up cold was normal. That children wearing coats inside was expected. That burning endless wood was the price of living in Montana. Raymond's cabin challenged that belief. It suggested something uncomfortable, that people had been working harder than they needed to. Some resisted that idea. A few old-timers said it was luck, others said that winter was unusual. Some said it worked only once, but winter returned the next year, and the cabin worked again. Raymond never tried to sell his idea loudly. He didn't advertise. He didn't brag. He answered questions when asked. He invited people inside. He let them feel the warmth for themselves. That was enough. One by one, Changes began. A trapper added a thermal mass bench to his cabin. A young couple installed a rocket stove. A builder curved a roof instead of making sharp corners. None of these changes were dramatic on their own. But together, they reduced wood use, increased comfort, and changed daily life. Families noticed the difference immediately. Children stopped sleeping in coats. Mothers no longer worried about running out of firewood. Men stopped waking every hour to feed fires. Winter was still cold, but it was no longer cruel. The most powerful moment came when Marcus Hendren, the master builder who had criticized Raymond the loudest, spoke publicly. He stood in front of a group of builders and admitted something few men with decades of respect ever admit. I was wrong, he said. He explained that traditional cabins worked, but they were not efficient. They survived winter, but they wasted heat. They relied on constant labor instead of smart design. Raymond hadn't rejected tradition. He had asked a better question: can this be done with less suffering? That question spread quietly. By the early 1950s, the valley looked mostly the same. Log cabins still stood. Smoke still rose from chimneys. Tradition was not erased, but winter felt different. Wood piles lasted longer, homes felt more even in temperature, people rested more, and whenever someone complained about the cold, someone else would say, "Have you seen that curved cabin up near the range?" Raymond lived simply. He never became famous. He never left Montana again. He used his cabin as proof, not as a product. Years later, students and engineers would study similar designs and give them names. They would explain them with charts and formulas, but Raymond never needed those words. He understood something very basic: nature always follows rules. If you understand the rules, you can work with nature instead of fighting it. When Montana's cold reached -42 degrees, winter exposed every weakness point. One cabin didn't survive because it was stronger. It survived because it was smarter. And that lesson remains true anywhere. Cold still tests human shelter. The years passed, but the winter of 1948 never truly left the Flathead Valley. People spoke about it the way sailors speak about storms that almost broke them. They remembered the sound of wind scraping walls through the night. They remembered the fear of watching firewood disappear faster than planned. They remembered the cold creeping into corners where it did not belong, and they remembered the cabin that did not struggle. Raymond Caldwell's Quonset cabin became part of local memory, not because it looked strange, but because it changed how people thought. It quietly proved that suffering was not the price of living in cold places. Poor design was. Raymond never claimed to be smarter than anyone else. He never said tradition was wrong. What he believed was simpler. If something works, you keep it. If something works better, you learn from it. As time went on, more people came to see his cabin, especially during winter. Not out of curiosity anymore, but out of respect. They wanted to feel the warmth. They wanted to understand how it stayed even and calm while other homes fought the cold every hour. Raymond welcomed them all. He showed them the floor and explained how stone stores heat. He showed them the walls and explained how insulation slows loss. He pointed at the curved ceiling and explained how warm air moves gently instead of escaping. He showed them the stove and explained that fire does not need to be big to be powerful, it needs to be efficient. People listened differently now. They were not defending tradition anymore, they were protecting their families. Some copied the design exactly. Others adapted it to what they already had. A farmer added earth against his cabin walls. A hunter rebuilt his fireplace into a closed stove. A young builder started designing homes with fewer corners and lower ceilings. Change did not arrive loudly. It arrived quietly, like heat spreading through stone. By the mid-1950s, the valley looked mostly the same to outsiders. Log cabins still stood. Smoke still rose from chimneys. But life inside those homes had changed. Winters became more manageable, wood piles lasted longer, people slept better. The greatest change was not physical. It was mental. People stopped believing that winter must always hurt. Raymond grew older. He married. He raised a family. Eventually, he built a larger home nearby, but he never abandoned the original cabin. He kept it maintained. He used it as a workshop, then as a guest shelter. Visitors always said the same thing: it feels different in here. Even with no fire burning, the temperature stayed calm. The walls did not feel cold. The floor did not steal warmth from bare feet. The space felt stable, like it resisted the outside world. Raymond would smile and say, "That's because it's not fighting winter. It's ignoring it." In the 1970s and 1980s, something unexpected happened. Students from universities began studying rural buildings. They wanted to understand why some homes used less energy than others. They measured temperatures. They tracked fuel use. They compared designs. Raymond's cabin became a case study. The findings were clear. Structures inspired by his design used far less fuel while providing better comfort. The numbers were not emotional. They were not opinions. They were measured facts. The curved shape reduced heat loss, the thermal mass stabilized temperature, the efficient stove wasted almost nothing. These ideas were not new to the world. Similar methods existed in old European homes and ancient shelters. What was new was seeing them work so clearly in modern Montana. Raymond never took credit. He always said, "I just paid attention." When Raymond passed away in the early 1990s, his obituary was simple. It mentioned his service, his family, his work. It did not mention the cabin, but the valley remembered. They remembered the winter when -42 degrees tested everyone equally. They remembered who struggled. And they remembered who didn't. Today, people face different winters. Not always colder, but more uncertain. Fuel costs rise. Resources grow tight. Weather becomes unpredictable, and once again, people are asking old questions. How do we stay warm? How do we use less? How do we stop wasting energy? The answer has not changed. You do not need bigger fires, you need smarter shelters. Raymond Caldwell's lesson was never about metal or Quonset huts. It was about thinking clearly when fear and tradition say otherwise. He proved that comfort is not luxury, efficiency is not weakness, and questioning old methods is not disrespect, it is survival. When Montana's cold reached -42 degrees, winter showed no mercy. It exposed every flaw, every assumption, every shortcut point. One cabin did not survive because it was lucky. It survived because someone understood how heat works, how cold moves, and how nature always follows rules. That truth still matters wherever winter tests shelter, wherever fuel is precious, wherever people believe suffering is normal. Sometimes, the thing that looks wrong at first is the thing that finally gets it right. And sometimes, one quiet cabin changes everything. As more people began to think differently about shelter, they also began to think differently about hardship. For a long time, hardship had been treated as proof of strength. If winter was painful, people believed that pain meant they were doing something right. If life was uncomfortable, it meant they were tough enough to endure it. Raymond's cabin quietly questioned that belief. It showed that strength does not come from suffering. Strength comes from preparation. That idea is difficult for many people to accept, because suffering feels familiar. Familiar things feel safe, even when they hurt. Tradition often survives not because it is best, but because it is known. In the Flathead Valley, tradition had once said that cold corners were normal. Drafts were expected. Waking up to frozen water was just part of life. Burning through endless firewood was considered honest labor. Raymond did not insult that labor. He respected it. But he also saw its cost. He saw tired bodies. He saw wasted time. He saw fear when wood piles ran low, and he asked a simple question: why should survival require exhaustion? That question began to echo in other places too. Quietly. Slowly. One person at a time. In the years after Raymond's cabin proved itself, small groups of people began experimenting. Not large companies. Not governments. Just individuals who wanted a better way to live, homesteaders, farmers. Off-grid families, people who lived close enough to nature to understand its power. They began building homes that did not depend on constant energy. Homes that stayed cool in summer and warm in winter. Homes that forgave mistakes instead of punishing them. These homes shared common ideas. Even when they looked different, they used the ground for stability. They used mass to store heat. They used shape to guide airflow. They used smaller, smarter fires. They did not need constant attention. This is where Raymond's lesson became even more important. A good shelter does not need you to fight for it. It supports you when you are tired. It protects you when you are sick. It keeps you safe when you make mistakes. Traditional cabins often required constant effort. Miss a few hours feeding the fire, and the house punished you with cold. Fall asleep too deeply, and you woke to frozen air. Raymond's cabin forgave sleep. That forgiveness is not a luxury. It is safety. In real survival situations, people do not fail because they are weak. They fail because they are exhausted. They make mistakes when they are tired. They forget steps. They misjudge risk. A shelter that reduces effort reduces danger. This is something winter always teaches, but people often forget. As the decades passed, modern life created new kinds of cold. Not always weather-related, but system-related. Power failures. Fuel shortages. Broken supply chains. People who lived in houses that relied on constant energy learned a harsh lesson. When power stops, comfort stops immediately. Heat disappears within hours. Pipes freeze. Panic follows. Meanwhile, homes designed with passive principles stayed calm longer. Not warm forever, but long enough to think, long enough to act, long enough to survive. This is why Raymond's story matters today, not because everyone should live in a metal cabin, not because everyone should copy his exact design, but because his thinking saves lives. He did not ask, "How do I make this look right?" He asked, "How do I make this work when everything else fails?" That is the question survival always asks. People often misunderstand efficiency. They think it means weakness. They think it means smaller, lighter, cheaper. But real efficiency is about respect, respect for energy, respect for effort, respect for human limits. Raymond respected winter enough to study it. He respected heat enough to slow it down instead of wasting it, and he respected people enough to believe they deserved comfort, not constant struggle. That belief changed how shelters were built, even when people did not realize where the idea came from. Today, many modern designs quietly follow Raymond's principles. Passive solar homes. Earth-sheltered buildings. High-mass stoves. Airtight construction. People call them innovations. But they are really rediscoveries of simple truths. Heat rises, cold seeks gaps, mass remembers warmth, and shape matters. Raymond understood all of that without fancy language. He learned it by watching winter closely, and winter never lies. There is something people rarely talk about when they speak of warmth. They talk about temperature, fuel, insulation, and weather. But warmth is not only physical. Warmth is also mental. A home that stays warm changes how people think. When a person is cold, their mind shrinks. They focus only on survival. On the next log. On the next hour. On the next problem. Cold steals attention and replaces it with urgency. Raymond's cabin gave something rare during winter: peace. Inside that cabin, people did not rush. They did not panic. They did not count minutes until the fire needed feeding again. Their bodies relaxed, and when the body relaxes, the mind follows. This matters more than most people realize. When humans feel safe, they make better decisions. They plan. They rest. They notice details. They learn. When humans feel threatened, even by cold, they become reactive. They repeat old habits. They cling to what feels familiar, even when it hurts. This is why so many bad designs survive for so long. Not because they work well, but because people are too exhausted to question them. Raymond questioned them because he had space to think. His cabin gave him that space. That space allowed him to notice how heat moved slowly through stone. How the walls did not feel cold. How the air did not rush or swirl. How silence replaced the constant crackle of a desperate fire. Silence is often misunderstood. But in winter, silence can mean safety. A house that is quiet is not losing energy. A house that is calm is not leaking heat. Raymond noticed these things not with instruments, but with his body. He paid attention to comfort the same way hunters pay attention to weather. Over time, people who visited his cabin felt the difference before they understood it. They sat longer, they spoke more softly, they rested without realizing why. That is not an accident. Shelter shapes behavior. A home that demands constant work creates tension. A home that supports its occupants creates calm. This is why cold places often produce hardened people. Not because the cold makes them strong, but because their shelters demand endurance. When shelter improves, people soften. And softening is not weakness. It is relief. Raymond believed that relief was not something people had to earn. It was something they could design. As these ideas spread quietly, something else began to change. People stopped romanticizing hardship. They stopped telling stories about how cold their homes were as a badge of honor. Instead, they shared ideas. How did you insulate that wall? Why does your stove use so little wood? How does your house stay warm overnight? Those questions mark the beginning of progress. Cold has a way of revealing truth. It strips away comfort and exposes reality. When winter arrives, there are no opinions. There is only what works and what doesn't. Raymond's cabin worked, not because it was expensive, not because it was advanced, but because it respected physics. Physics does not care about tradition. It does not care about pride. It does not care about how things have always been done. Heat moves, cold spreads, energy is lost unless protected. Raymond did not fight these truths. He accepted them. That acceptance made his cabin honest. As climate and energy challenges grow around the world, honesty in design becomes more important. Fancy systems fail. Complex machines break. Technology dependent on constant support collapses when that support disappears, but basic principles endure. A thick wall does not need electricity. A curved roof does not need maintenance. Stored heat does not need permission to stay. These things continue working even when everything else stops. This is why the future often looks like the past, only smarter. People searching for answers often expect something new. But cold teaches the same lesson every generation. Simple solutions last longer. Raymond never spoke about the future. He never predicted energy crises or system failures. But his cabin quietly prepared for them anyway. That is what good design does. It protects people from problems they do not yet see, and it does so without asking for attention.